Hello and welcome to the Jewitches podcast. Today's topic is something that I have been asked about since the very first time I posted about Jewish magic online. And that's why I use the word witch. Now you might be thinking, we've covered this before. And yes, we have. I have a blog post and a podcast episode titled, Can You Even Be a Jewish Witch? Where I go into a lot of different aspects, but I'm the first to admit, and I believe I say it in there, that if I ever find a better word, I'll use it. And this is an ever-evolving perspective. That one talks a lot about, sort of understanding the language that's used in the Tanakh, specifically, in the Torah, specifically things like thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, that kind of thing. And something that I've been very grateful for, I think you can hear a dog barking. Hopefully you can't, but I definitely can. Something that I've been very grateful for is the ability to learn and grow and have our opinions evolve and change. And it's not to say I disagree with what I said in those podcasts and blog posts, because I don't necessarily. But I think that I have a more evolved perspective now. So I want to talk a little bit more about it because I keep getting these comments and people keep asking, so I want to have a place to direct them. I use the word witch for a number of reasons. And I want to be very clear, I don't actually use it very often. People often ask me, so do you introduce yourself as a witch? And the answer is no, I don't. There's a reason that Jew comes first in Jewitches. I am Jewish and I introduce myself as such. And when I meet people and they ask, oh, what's your religion? I say that I'm Jewish. And if they want more, I talk about the Jewish folk practices, the mysticism. And, depending on the person, I might pull out witchcraft, but it's not something that I find comes up very often in my day-to-day life. So why do I use it online? Well, it's the word people know. We have this idea of witchcraft that is shaped fundamentally by a history of anti-Semitism, but that reality has been forgotten by most people. And TV shows, and this is not to say these are bad TV shows or bad media, but TV shows like Charmed, Practical Magic, we have Sabrina the Teenage Witch. We have a very specific understanding of modern witchcraft. And that idea is heavily shaped by Wicca. And Wicca itself is heavily shaped by hundreds and hundreds of years of anti-Semitism. If you listen to my podcast on Jews and the witch craze, or you read my blog post on it, you get a sort of small window into the history of how witches and Jews have historically been tied together, with the important caveat that in most of European history, someone who was specifically a witch was a Christian who turned away from Jesus. And because Jews were inherently already turned away from Jesus, we didn't necessarily need to have the term witch applied to us. And again, I use the term applied because for most of history, people didn't get to choose to call themselves witches. And in fact, in much of the world, people still don't get to choose it. So if you do make that decision to choose to apply that term to yourself, be aware of that privilege, of the fact that we get to choose to call ourselves that without consequences or lebensgefährliche, life-altering consequences. I often get people who send me screenshots of things from across the internet, right? Whether they're DMing it to me on Instagram or in some cases emailing me, or I have friends and family who send me screenshots. I often get screenshots of horrendous anti-Semitism that's using the term Jewitches, and they're not referring to me or my organization or my company. They're referring to Jews in general. And they're saying, oh, the evil Jewitches, they're the reason, and then insert some horrendous thing. I was on Blue Sky, which is considered by many to be the more left-leaning, progressive, open version of Twitter. And I hadn't been on the app I've had an account for a number of years, but I hadn't been actively using it until fairly recently. And someone tweeted something that was personally quite sad to see. I believe it's deleted now, but it essentially said there are 3 causes of evil in the world: witches, Jews, and Jewish witches. And this is not uncommon. If you search the word Jewitches on Twitter or Reddit or anywhere where folks feel comfortable to spread their vitriol, you're not going to find people related to Jewish magic. You're going to find an anti-Semite. And so I feel that there is a level of power a level of reclamation, a level of opening the door to history when we choose to use that term. And again, I don't go around calling myself a witch. And this is a conversation I've had with many practitioners from various magical traditions, right? Not just Jews, but folk Catholics, non-Christian witches from various cultural backgrounds. And many people have found that they often identified heavily with the term in the beginning of their spiritual journey and then sort of wandered away from it for more accurate terminology in their mind, whether that's practitioner, folk magician, or a cultural term, right? I think that when we hold on to labels that don't suit us, we're doing ourselves a disservice. But I also think that rejecting labels solely because of controversy around them, we might also be doing ourselves a disservice. And I genuinely do feel like it's a disservice for me to reject the label witch or the label witchcraft solely because of the anti-Semitic history that surrounds it. Instead, I feel like there's so much there that we can reclaim and explain. There is so much knowledge within the term. There is so much history that the door is open to. I've mentioned it many times over the years. People say, so why do you choose the word witchcraft if it's so polarizing? I choose it because it's polarizing. For so many years, people have felt like if they wanted magic, they had to go outside of Judaism. They had to find it somewhere else. There is a book, it's not a biography by someone who's Jewish and was involved in Wicca for many years. And they talk about how they were a young teen, and I think it was the 90s, and they wanted magic. They wanted to be involved in magic. And so they went looking, and all they could find was Wicca. And Judaism to them was so devoid of it because of the community they grew up in and because of the rhetoric surrounding it. So they felt like their only option was to leave Judaism, to leave their home and find somewhere else. And that has been one of the driving forces behind my work at Jewitches, is giving people the doorway if they want to walk through it. I have no interest in changing people's way of practicing Judaism. I don't. And I think that there's a misconception that I want to change people's minds. I don't. It's frankly, it's neither here nor there. It impacts me in no way, shape, or form of how you personally do your Judaism. And maybe it's the fact that I'm not, Jews are non-proselytizing and therefore just really doesn't matter to me, but I couldn't care less. But I do care about the young, the 15-year-old, the 47-year-old, the 74-year-old who wants magic and feels like they have to abandon Judaism in order to find it, when the reality is we have so much of it right here. You don't have to leave. You don't have to go to Wicca or Hellenic polytheism or any other form of spirituality to find magic. It exists right here, and it doesn't have to be what you're going to see in the books from the Kabbalah Center. It doesn't have to be that. There are so many types of Jewish magic, and there's a reason that I say Jewish magic and I don't say just Jewish mysticism. If I say it, I'm pairing it together because, and I think it's so important to acknowledge this, I am not just talking about Kabbalah. There is this misconception, and I deal with it in person, I deal with it online. I talk about Jewish magic, and they're like, well, Kabbalah is not magic. Okay, I didn't say Kabbalah. It's not what I'm talking about. Kabbalah was codified largely it was really blossomed in the 12th century Spain and was codified after that. For the thousands of years before that, what do you think Jews did? There are entire books dedicated to Jewish magic before the rise of Kabbalah because it exists. And I want you to think about everything you know historically about Kabbalah, right? You're probably taught that it's only for learned men who are over the age of 40, right? And yet, Jewish tradition teaches the more wives, the more witchcraft. If Jewish women were forbidden from learning Kabbalah, and yet they practice witchcraft, what were they referring to? They're referring to the folk traditions, the folk practices. And this is not to say that these are separate from Kabbalah, because it's a Venn diagram. It is a woven tapestry. It is integrated. But it is not synonymous. They are not the same. There are absolutely aspects of Kabbalah within the folk magic practices we see, but there are also aspects that are completely devoid of Kabbalah because Kabbalah wasn't around when it was created, or it was later integrated. Or these are traditions that predate the rise of Kabbalah, which again is a received tradition and a beautiful tradition that didn't come about until later. And we are also forgetting that folk magic is the magic of the folk, of the people. I was thinking recently about sleep magic, right? There's lots of wonderful information you can find about sleep in Kabbalah. We're coming up on the month of Kislev. The month of Kislev is Kabbalistically associated with dreaming and sleep, the depths of winter, right? And then there's also all of this folk magic. I was reading A Frog Under the Tongue, which is Eastern European folk magic, about pine cones being placed under pillows or around pillows to promote sleep in children. They were called Schlaf-Epilech or Schlaf-Kepelech, sleep apples or sleep heads, right? That isn't coming from Kabbalistic knowledge. It's coming from folk magic and folk tradition, right? And the way that these things have grown together, two parts of the same tree, is beautiful, and we should acknowledge that, but we shouldn't synonymize and homogenize that. And so when I talk about why I use the term witch, there are many reasons. It's a complicated answer, which I think is ultimately a very Jewish answer, right? We are a nuanced people who hold many a truth within us. And I think that to water it down in any way would be a disservice to our communities, to our realities, to our history, to our foreparents, to the ancestors who walked, carried, and cradled these traditions within their palms. Whether you are looking for magic or you are looking for history, Jewitches, the goal of Jewitches, and you can go back to the very beginning, I've always said this, the goal has always been to open the door. And if you are interested in walking through that door, fantastic. No one's forcing you, no one's asking you to do anything. But if you want to, we have it. There is magic here. And the term witch, you don't have to use it. No one is telling you to. No one's saying you have to walk into a room and introduce yourself as a witch. You don't have to call your practice witchcraft. The term witchcraft is so ambiguous and loosely defined for a reason. It can be applied, but it doesn't need to be applied. You don't have to call anything witchcraft. You don't have to if you don't want to. And again, using the term at all, often people assume that it's, you're trying to apply it to everyone and everything. I'm not. Truly not interested in, adding it to anything. Rather, using it to let people know, to signal there is something here. This is where you should look. This is where you should dig, because you're going to find an incredible history. You're going to learn so much about so many aspects of our communities and so many of these traditions that for centuries have been erased in the name of keeping us safe. And that reminds me, I often have people say, oh, well, aren't you afraid of propelling anti-Semitism? Yes, I'm terrified. Every day when I post something, I consider the ramifications. I receive hundreds, if not thousands of comments on the daily across all my platforms that are spewing the most vitriolic, hateful anti-Semitism. And oftentimes they are, along the lines of, oh, well, you've confirmed that Jews are demonic. But I think back to our ancestors who had to make the decision to rationalize our practices for safety. And I think of how much was lost and how it has resulted in where we are today. And this is not to judge our ancestors. I don't. I carry them in such great esteem, and they made the decision they had to make. But we're at a different time now, and we are witnessing the result of the rationalization, the demystification of a lot of our practices. I speak with people who spent years practicing spiritual traditions that they felt were their only option for the kind of connection they were looking for. And now they get to come back to Judaism. And I speak to people who felt so ostracized by our community, who felt they had no other choice but to turn away. And I believe that it is our duty to teach the true history of our community, to teach our true practices and traditions, and not to hide them for fear of anti-Semitism, even if that fear is very real, even if we deal with the results of it every single day. And I know that this is not necessarily popular, and there are people who disagree with me, and well, to be Jewish is to disagree in many ways, right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions, 3 Jews, 50 opinions. There's many a way of saying it, but I wanted to sort of have a very loose conversation about this sort of stream of consciousness as we think about it. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I believe Spotify now allows you to respond to this episode. If not, you're more than welcome to go share it on my Instagram. I am always grateful to hear opinions and thoughts. And I have some other great episodes coming up for you. Stick around and listen. Bye.